Scripture reading comes from Hebrews chapter 13, verses 1 through 2. Hebrews chapter 13, verses 1 through 2. Let love of the brethren continue. Do not neglect to show hospitality to strangers, for by this some have entertained angels without knowing it.
Morning. It is good to be back in the saddle again. We appreciate the opportunity Julie and I had to travel to San Antonio last weekend to see David, our youngest son, graduate from the Air Force basic training. He is doing very well. The Air Force life seems to suit him, which is really good. And I think a large part of it, David always said, I don't want to have to think about what I have to do. I just want someone to tell me. Well, that's what he has in the military. They're just telling him what to do every day. And so we're thankful that he did so well, but thankful to be back home. Sorry that we missed the first few lessons of Brother John Dilbeck, but we've got to listen to several of them online. If you have not, we're not able to be here for any of the lessons, or if you missed some of them, be aware that they are available at our YouTube channel. You can go and watch them. They're excellent lessons. So thankful for the opportunity we had to be with Brother DeBerry and to visit with him the short time that we had. Julie and I did, but I know the congregation here is fully blessed because of it. If you're visiting with us this morning, we want you to know how blessed we feel that you are here. We want you to know that you are wanted here at Brighton. Not just welcome, but that you're wanted too. That we together can be stronger, that we can draw closer to the Lord, and that ultimately we can have a home in heaven. If you're visiting with us and you have questions about the church or about the things that we do here, or you're seeking something in particular, talk to someone. We want to visit with you about it because it's important that we understand our relationship with God is dependent upon our relationship with one another as well. So we appreciate that time. If you haven't done so, do take a moment to fill out that visitor's card from the back of the pew in front of you that Les mentioned a moment ago. We would like to have a record of your attendance. I remember walking into the building and immediately being punched by an earthy smell of mildew and dirt. And immediately you begin to look around, don't you, and figure out what it is that's causing this. Are they cultivating mushrooms somewhere? Is it dampness under the water fountain? I looked around and they had the exposed ductwork and the vents on the side, and in the corner of the vents there was rust and hard water deposits that were the telltale signs of water condensation building up on the air conditioner and dripping onto the floors. In fact, around the window sills, it was like concrete, and they were damp just a little bit. And you think, well, maybe that's what was causing the smell. I don't know, but you walked into the restroom, and the Renewsit air freshener had lost the battle back in 1987, but it was still sitting there as if somehow it's going to start working again. And it looked like the last person to clean the bathroom gave it a lick and a promise, and no one's followed up on the promise yet. It was quite horrifying. And then when we walked into the auditorium, there were tears and snags in the carpet, especially in the seams where the carpet came together. There were large gashes, and honestly, it felt kind of like we had walked into a basement, and kind of smelled that way too in the auditorium. The preaching was fine, and the brethren that we met there was fine, but I have to admit, I've not been back, and I don't have a real desire to go back to that place. And you may say, well, that sounds very superficial, but have you ever had a bad experience going to a different church, visiting somewhere? Maybe the preacher was too loud, or maybe he was too quiet and you couldn't hear him. Or maybe the song leader went too slow or went too fast or sang songs that you didn't like or didn't know that well. Or maybe no one engaged you while you were there in this congregation, or somebody offended you. Maybe they said something that offended the things that you said, or the building was run down, or maybe it just smelled bad. There are many reasons why we might have a bad experience at another congregation. And when we have those, we often feel blessed when we get to come back home. We get to be with our brethren. We get to be in that comfortable area where things smell like they're supposed to smell, right? And the preacher's volume is just right, and the lessons are just so, and the song leadings, it's just comfortable. It fits us in those moments. But I think being in the church or being part of the church sometimes is being like, it's like we're living in a freshly painted house. Have you ever noticed when you first paint a house, there's that smell, that the paint fumes that are there, and you're there each and every day, and with time it seems like it doesn't smell. You kind of get used to the smell, right? And then you go out and you're outside for a couple hours, and you come back in, and what's the first thing you smell? The paint fumes. They're just as strong as they ever were. But you see, we become acclimated to it at times. And sometimes that's the way it is in the church. Our church culture can be that way. First, our quirks and our shortcomings are noticeable to everyone. Well, that's just so-and-so. That's how they are. That's the way she communicates, or that's how he behaves. And those are our quirks and our shortcomings. We become used to them, and we tend to forget about them. They don't bother us anymore. They don't stick out to us. And we continue with business as usual and become comfortable with how we do church, as it were. But what about the visitor who comes to Brighton, who is not familiar with our quirks and our shortcomings? They are anything but comfortable to them. Church marketing research, and there's an entire field of, what makes a church palatable to other people, that suggests that new visitors to a church will make up their mind whether they're going to return for a second visit or go looking somewhere else for a new church. They will make up their mind in the first 7 to 10 minutes. 7 to 10 minutes. That's before a song is ever sung. That's before a lesson is ever preached. That's often before a prayer is even led. 7 to 10 minutes. And in interviews with visitors who've come from different congregations or different churches, there are certain first impression factors, things that they see that help make that determination in such a quick amount of time. In 7 to 10 minutes, what they're seeing is the parking lot. Is there enough parking? Are they having a hard time finding a parking space? It's getting into the building and finding their way around the building, navigating facilities, interactions with people that are in the building when they first get there, the atmosphere, including what do the walls look like and the carpet look like and what does it smell like. Those are the first impression factors that most visitors who are interviewed when they've visited a new church, those are the things they talk about. They don't talk about, was the sermon that good? They don't talk about so much, was the song leading that good? They don't talk about the order of services or things like that. And we'd be quick to look at those things and say, well, that's pretty superficial, isn't it? I mean, I'm going to determine whether or not it's a good church by how it smells. Listen, if it's a sound church, what's it matter what it smells like, right? If you've got good preaching going on, what does it matter what the carpet looks like? What does it matter? And we're very quick to talk about the superficiality. Shouldn't they just want the truth? And if it's being taught, just be content with those things. But we need to remember that most first-time visitors are not committed to Christ. They're just curious about Him. And with no commitment to Christ, they begin to evaluate new surroundings just like they're evaluating a new restaurant or a new movie theater. We're the same way. And so we need to be purposeful about how we present ourselves to visitors. And one of the things about Brighton is that I believe this church is poised for growth. We are actively infiltrating our community with the gospel, with information about the church on a regular basis. We announced a couple of weeks ago that we're putting in place this measures to contact every new mover, everyone who's moving into our area, inviting them to services. There are other efforts that are in the planning stages, and it's all for one thing, to get people to come visit. Now, if we're successful in all of those areas and people begin to come visit at the Brighton Church of Christ, then we as the members of the Brighton Church of Christ need to be prepared and purposeful with how we engage them. And we must engage them with hospitality and love. You know, of all the evangelistic endeavors that we could engage in, this is the most effective. It is better than door knocking. It's better than newslettering. It's better than radio shows or television shows. Why? Because people who visit here already have an interest in the church here. Be it however small it is, they have shown interest. And so we need to nurture that interest. To grow it into commitment is what we're trying to do. And we need to be purposeful in that we know what we want to do, we know what we're trying to get to, and so let's go there. If you have your Bibles, turn with us to the scripture reading this morning from Hebrews chapter 13, verses 1 and 2, where the Hebrew writer concludes with a series of final admonitions. Really, we see throughout the first 12 chapters of the book of Hebrews, the book focuses on the need for us to stay with Christ, especially those in the first century who were of a Jewish background, who had gone into Christianity, but now were tempted to turn back to the old Jewish ways. And the writer is writing to them and says, look, you need to stay with Christ. Don't go back to the old ways. And most of the book is spent telling that Christianity is better. If you were going to give it a one-word title, that title is better. Because throughout the book, he shows that we have a better Savior, we have a better high priest, we have a better rest, we have a better law, we have better incentives. And then we get down to the final chapter of Hebrews, that this is a seemingly disjointed hodgepodge of admonitions that has caused some to say about the last chapter that it was not original with the rest of the book. Everything else is about the better, and then you have these quick little quips at the end. And it just doesn't fit, they say. But to me, it fits perfectly. Because what he's done, he says, look, stay with Christ because Christ is better, and what he offers you is a better life. And that's what chapter 13 is about, is admonitions about a better way to live. And no more is this more clearly seen than our current social diseases that surround us every single day. Think about the admonitions here in chapter 13, where it tells us to uphold the sanctity of marriage, to respect authority, to show compassion to the underprivileged and those who are oppressed. It encourages us to have a proper attitude toward money. What are the ills in our society but poor attitudes toward money? Lack of compassion for the underprivileged. A lack of focus on the sanctity of marriage, where it is broken down and given up on. You see, this becomes the better way of life, and we can see how our society would be better if we just listened to what the book says. Better Christianity and better engagement with our visitors and better life begins right here in Hebrews chapter 13. And we're just going to focus on two ideas that come in verse 1 and 2, and it's about love and hospitality. What is it that visitors need to be engaged with when they come to visit us? Love and hospitality, right? Let's begin in verse 1 where he says, let brotherly love continue. It's a very short verse. In fact, in the Greek, it's only really two words. It's the word continue or remain and the word brotherly love. Love forms the basis for Christian living. Everything that he is going to say in the rest of the chapter rests upon the foundation of love. And so there's a reason why he puts it first. It leads the pack in chapter 13. Here, love is from the Greek word Philadelphia. And that's, in this case, it's more than just a town in eastern Tennessee, right? Philadelphia means brotherly love. It comes from the Greek phileo, love, and autophoi, which is brother, or autophos, which is brother. And so the idea of Philadelphia is brotherly love. In fact, the motto of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania is, of course, the city of brotherly love, because that's what its name means. And so this is the actual word that is used here. And sometimes we come in and we say, well, agape love, that's the love we need to focus on. And phileo love is somewhat less than that. But in reality, that's sort of made up on our end. Phileo, this love, this affection, this looking out for the better or the good of others around us, is a very strong form of love, much like agape. It's not somehow relegated to second-class love. If you truly phileo someone, you do agape them. It's a hand-in-glove type deal. And so here he's saying, he's not saying that we need to love the brethren in a second-class kind of love, different than what we would love God, but we are to love our brethren just like we would love God, because he is the extension, or they are the extension of God in heaven himself. Louw-Nida in their primary Greek lexicon offers this in reference to the word Philadelphia. They say, in non-biblical context, these terms would offer or refer to affection or love for persons belonging to a so-called in-group, the in-group. You know, the people that we would run with. And so we might have an in-group in our workplace, people that we work alongside of. We interact with them on a daily basis. We may have lunch with them at times. And we share different parts and aspects of our lives. And in a way, we love them. We come to love them. And those who are in that group simply because they're part of that group. And then we have other parts of our lives that have in-groups. They might be people that we recreate with. And so we all come together. Maybe it's a Tuesday night bowling league or something. And in those bowling leagues, we share bits of ourselves. And we come to have great affection and affinity for those people. And we would have Philadelphia. We would have brotherly love for those in the in-group. But Louw-Nida go on to say that in the New Testament, this in-group is defined in the terms of Christian faith. That is, the in-group here are Christians. And so we love one another as Christians. Just as the Bible tells us to do good unto all men, especially those of the household of faith, I think we can say the Bible tells us to love all people, especially those of the household of faith. Love, of course, begins with God. Why? Because God is love. 1 John 4:8. That love, then, when we recognize that God is love, then we turn our affections toward him and love God in return. We love him because he first loved us, right? 1 John 4 and verse 19. And as we love him, we look around and we see those who are with him, those who are his, intimately because of their Christian faith, and we say, as an extension of God, we love his church. We love the brothers, 1 John 3 and verse 14. And then ultimately, that love then extends beyond just the church, beyond God, to the world that God so loved that he gave his only begotten Son for. John 3 and verse 16. It extends to a world that is at enemy with God because of their sin. Jesus himself would tell us in the great Sermon on the Mount to love your enemies. We love these people because God loved them. I think of Leviticus 19 in the context where he's giving all of these admonitions in the law. He says, you shall treat the stranger who sojourns with you as the native among you. Someone who is a foreigner, someone who is not a Jew that is living in your land, you treat him just like you would everybody else. Now, by the first century, the Jews had a hard time with those verses. How do we love this Gentile like I would love a Jewish brother? It's impossible. But he says specifically, not only do you treat them as a native, but he says, you shall love him as yourself. For you were strangers in the land of Egypt, and I, the Lord, am your God. We think about the reason for he's saying this in Leviticus 19:34. He says, you were a stranger in the land of Egypt. I'm the Lord your God. I brought you out of Egypt. I showed you love. There was nothing that they did that deserved God's love, but God showed them love despite their sin, despite forgetting who he was. And so here's God. He's saying, because I loved you, you love them as well. In the New Testament, they asked Jesus, what is the great commandment? And you remember he said to love the Lord your God with all of your heart and with all of your soul and with all your mind and all of your strength. The second is like unto it. What was it? Love your neighbor as yourself. Matthew chapter 22 and verse 38 and 9. Love your neighbor as yourself. You remember when he made that statement one time, they asked him, well, who is my neighbor? As if to catch him in Luke chapter 10. Who is my neighbor? And Jesus gives the parable of the Good Samaritan. It wasn't the priest who was the leader, the spiritual leader of the nation, didn't turn out to be the neighbor. The Levite who came by, the Levite who was the servant of the nation, did not play the neighbor. It was the Samaritan, the half-breed, the hated ones. He was the one that showed himself to be a neighbor. It doesn't have to be your next door neighbor. It doesn't have to be someone of the same race or the same country or ethnicity that you are. Neighborliness is based upon action more than it is on blood. It is based upon the deeds which we do more than it is the place that we live. So how do we show love to a stranger? Isn't that the right question we're asking? We're talking about visitors coming into our auditorium. We're talking about people that we don't know. They, by definition, are strangers. They're strange to us. Not strange as in odd, but they're just unknown to us. How do we treat them and how do we show them love? Well, the next part is in verse 2. The first part of verse 2 says, do not neglect to show hospitality to strangers. If verse 1 is the basis of love, the first part of 2 is the hospitality to strangers. Love reaches out to the unknown. That's hard to us. And I think it's interesting what he says. He says, do not neglect to show hospitality. Because we tend, as human beings, I don't think this is just in the church. I think as human beings, we tend to gravitate toward those that we know and we know well. And we foster that relationship. And those who are strangers to us, we kind of hold them at arm's length at best. Sometimes we may ignore them, pretend we never even saw them, do not engage them. They're unfamiliar to us, and that unfamiliarity breeds some form of contempt with them. That's the way we are as human beings. And so what he says is don't neglect to show hospitality. Don't act like everybody else in the world. Don't follow your natural instincts. Step out of your comfort zones and show hospitality. Now, I find it interesting because the main word in verse 2 is the word philoxenius. It's very similar to Philadelphia, philoxenius. And what does it mean? Well, same phileo, love. Whatever it means in verse 1, it means in verse 2. It means to show an affinity for, an affection for. It means to look out for the best of these. And then the second part of the word is the word xeno or xenos. And it means stranger. The word that is translated into the English as hospitality is the word love strangers. We say brotherly love in verse 1. We could say strangerly love in verse 2, but that's kind of a pushing it maybe. Love for strangers. Going back to Low-and-Ida and their grammar, they said that show hospitality to strangers. It means that is someone who is not regarded as a member of the extended family or a close friend. Now what does he say? Philadelphia are for those who are in the group. Those that we have a natural affinity for. Those that are easy to love, right? But in verse 2 he says, and don't forget to show love to those who are outside the group. Those who are strangers to us. Low-and-Ida go on to say, to receive a stranger as a guest is sometimes expressed idiomatically as to let a stranger sit at one's table, to offer a bed to a stranger, or to let a stranger enter one's house. We have all sorts of reasons in our modern day, some legitimate reasons, some just trying to get over it, about why we wouldn't let strangers into our house. It's dangerous. There's fear for my family, fear for my family's safety. And, we have all these fear. But how amazing is it when someone who is in a new area, someone who is unfamiliar with the people, someone who doesn't have an in-group yet, for you as a Christian to open your house to someone else, to that stranger, to let them into your family, to let them into a group, to be the first group that they get to be a part of. That's exactly what he's dealing with here, is the idea of hospitality. The adjective form is used in 1 Timothy 3 and Titus 1 and talking about elders and their hospitability, or being hospitable. We are called to love our strangers, those that are visiting with us. Romans chapter 12 verse 13 says to contribute to the needs of the saint and to seek to show hospitality, to seek to show love of the strangers. I love this because in the beginning part of Romans chapter 12, he says, outdo one another in showing honor and love. Well, how do we do that? Well, one of the ways is to show love to strangers, not just to one another, but to strangers as well. So how do we do that? How do we show love and hospitality to strangers? Someone says, I don't have a house that I can invite people into. And that may be true, and that's fine. We understand. Not everyone has that opportunity, but you can still show hospitality even without opening your home, right? Showing hospitality comes here in verse 13, or verse 2, the second part, when he says, for thereby some have entertained angels unaware. Obviously, he's making a reference back to Genesis chapter 18 and Abraham. Abraham, who was sitting there and lifted up his eyes, and he sees in the distance 3 men walking toward him. And he runs out to meet them, and he has them to stay for dinner. And, of course, he entertains them, and not knowing that the 3 men were the Lord and his angels. You see, he was unaware that they were angels, but he was doing the right thing. And this allusion to Abraham's hospitality, I think, is important for us to see. Think about Abraham's hospitality was that he was eager to serve. Notice when he sees them, the first thing he does is he runs out to them. He doesn't wait at the tent in the shade and until they get there, although come by in just a minute. But he's eager to serve. He runs out to meet them. And then Abraham pressed them to let him serve them. Turn aside, sit here with me. Let me get water. Let me get food. Right? He presses them. I want you to stay here with me for a short time. And then Abraham offers them rest on their journey. He says, sit here and let me bring water and wash your feet. The cooling salve of washing someone's feet to have your feet massaged and rubbed down and the dirt washed away. There's just a moment of refreshment that comes in that moment. And Abraham offered them rest in their journey. He even offered to take care of their needs by washing their feet. You have a need for your feet to be washed, and I'm going to wash your feet. He offered them food and drink in verses 4 and 5. These set an example for us with our visitors. Just very quickly, I think number one, when someone comes and visits us, we need to be prepared to be eager to engage them. Not just let the preacher or let the elders or let the door greeters, but each one of us to be eager to step forward and push toward that opportunity to engage them and talk to them. That means our visitors. And by the way, just as a side note here, anyone in the building that you don't know, talk to them. I know sometimes it's embarrassing. You go, you talk to someone, you introduce yourself, and they say, I know, I've been a member here for 3 years. I've seen you all around. That happens, I know, and it's a little embarrassing, but isn't it better to be embarrassed after 3 years than 6 years later trying to meet them, right? So if you don't know someone, talk to them. Do it with a smile. Do it with enthusiasm that you get to speak to this person. Have a few questions ready whenever you engage a visitor. You might ask them, where do you live? Or you might ask them, what brings you to Brighton? Or you might even get more specific. Is there something in particular that you're looking for in a church? What brings you to the Brighton Church of Christ? Or you even ask them, we'd love to have you come back. Would you consider coming back? Engage them with questions that get to a point. And the point, of course, is to incorporate them into Brighton. And then, and this is an important part of engaging, listen. Listen to what they say. Listen to their story. Now, I know there's some people you engage, and if you get a one-word answer, you're lucky. But most people understand how to carry on a conversation. Open that conversation and let them drive it. Learn about them. And whenever you're finished, come and tell me all about them. Or write it down. Let us know, because these are the ones that are going to be most fruitful for our evangelistic efforts. Number 2, we need, like Abraham, to seek to serve. Help them find a Bible class. Help them find a seat. Introduce them to an elder or to a minister or to other people in the congregation. Have them sit beside you. Or if they've already found a seat, and I know this may really hurt, go sit by them. Now that may mean you have to leave your assigned seat, but that's okay. That's okay. People taking attendance can still find you if you're not sitting in your assigned seat. But if that means going sitting next to a visitor and visit with them a little bit more, then do that. Show hospitality. Engage them in a way that in that first 7 to 10 minutes, they are impressed by the Brighton Church of Christ and not put off by it. Number 3, invite them to dinner. I know sometimes we may have other plans or things like that, but and a lot of times those plans can incorporate 1 or 2 other people. Invite them to dinner, and maybe to your home if you've got a roast on. Just throw on a couple of extra, cans of green beans when you get home to make up for the shortcoming. If you're afraid there's not enough food, you invite them into your home. If you're not going home, maybe you're going out to eat somewhere. Invite them to come along with you. Now, a lot of times visitors are on their way somewhere. They're a little skeptical, so that's understandable. And they say, well, we got plans, things like that. That's great. But there's a Monday and a Tuesday and a Thursday and a Friday, right? Inviting them to dinner doesn't just mean Sunday afternoon. It's okay to invite people at other times. Let them feel welcome. Let them come and be a part of your home. Not everyone can open their homes. I understand that. But open homes, open hearts of other people. And then number 4, find their needs. In Abraham's case, they needed their feet washed. They needed rest and relaxation on their journey. What are these people looking for? What do they need? What do they feel are their spiritual needs? What do they feel are their physical needs right now? A lot of times we don't get to those spiritual needs because we're so focused on some of our physical needs that are not being met. And maybe it is a case that we as the church or you as an individual can meet some of those physical needs while getting to the spiritual needs. That's what Jesus did. Jesus came to seek and save the lost, didn't he? But along the way, didn't he heal people? He restored sight to the blind, hearing to the deaf, wholeness to the lame. He met their physical needs to help get to their spiritual needs. Did it work every time? No, not every time. And it won't work every time with us. But if we are interested in our visitors and we show that interest, we have a better chance of getting them to return. We have a greater opportunity of getting them into a Bible study. And by getting them into a Bible study, we'll have a better chance of flaming that curiosity and turning it into a commitment. That's the challenge before us. That's the hospitality. We offer the world its only hope, the gospel. There's nothing else that can give hope to this world. And how sad it is if we hinder the spread of the gospel through lays or through apathy or through ill preparation. We don't want to be unprepared. Let's prepare each and every week to demonstrate love and hospitality, not just to the brethren, but love and hospitality to those who are strangers, those that we do not know, those who are visitors. And we do it with a desire to move them from visitor to member, because that's what God wants. That's what God seeks. Each of us plays a vital role. Don't think, well, that's good for the elders, or that's good for the preacher, or that's good for the people on that side of the auditorium, but I sit on this side of the auditorium and it's not for me. No, every one of us as individuals plays a vital role in this endeavor to reveal the hospitality to one of the least of these my brethren, Jesus would say, is to reveal it to Jesus, to do it unto one of the least of these. And that's what we're called to do. And so the question is are you ready? Are you prepared? Are you getting ready to engage visitors? Our preparation, I think, begins in the heart. A transformed heart, one that is transformed by Christ, that is molded to His Word. And so that question then to you this morning, right now, that is most important is, has He had His way with you? Has He transformed your heart? This morning, if you still need that transformation, if you are still getting ready, you need to obey the gospel, all things are ready for you to respond to His invitation while we stand and while we sing.